Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with all of you. I've never been here before, so this is the first. And it's good to be in New York. It's 85 degrees in Los Angeles right now, so I'm really happy I got out of that. You know, watching that. I haven't seen that in a long time. That's kind of an old one. I go home tomorrow. I've been here since Monday, so I'm kind of anxious to go home. When I go home, it's always, homies always have stuff they want to tell you. You know, they'll rush you at the door and they'll say, I passed my driving test, or I'm finally off probation. Once I had a homie very excited named Lupe, and Lupe came up to me and he said, while you were gone, my son was born. I said, wow, nice going, felicidades. When was he born? On his birthday. Wow, what are the chances of that happening, you know? Anyway, it's really indeed a privilege to join my brother Jesuits in this great Jesuit institution. I just found out that the great Vince Scully, the most beloved human being in Los Angeles, is a graduate of this place, which I didn't know. There you go, why not? Honest to God, he's more revered than just anybody in Los Angeles. What Martin Luther King says about church could well be said about your time here at Fordham Prep. It is not the place you've come to. It is the place you go from. It's always been that. It'll always be that. It is the place you go from. And you go from this place with a vision that's kind of formed by Jesuit spirituality and a sense of wanting the world to look differently than it currently looks. You don't just get an education here, you get a vision of how to imagine the world. The prophet Habakkuk writes, the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. But none of us want to wait for too long, you know, con los brazos cruzados, you know, tapping your feet and staring at your watches. You want to make something happen. And what you're called to make happen from the educational base here at Fordham is to really create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. Mother Teresa, I think, diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. How do we stand against forgetting that? How do we imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? How do we dismantle the barriers that exclude? And so in your way beyond this place, and even while you're here with the community service hours you have to do, you try to inch your way out to the margins. If you stand at the margins, look under your feet, you'll discover that the margins are being erased precisely because you've chosen to stand there. And you stand where Jesus decided to stand, with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, with those whose dignity has been denied, with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. Every once in a while you get this privileged moment to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no peace. I don't care how singularly focused we may well be on those worthy goals. They cannot happen if there isn't an undergirding sense that we belong to each other. And I suspect if kinship was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating it. So for 30 years I've worked with gang members, and it's been the privilege of my life, and honest to God, they've taught me everything of value. But in the last couple of years, they've taught me how to text, and I just couldn't be more grateful to them. I find that it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty good at it, pretty dexterous, LOL and OMG and BTW. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. So there I am in a car with two homies, Manuel and Poncho, older vatos who've been to prison, tattooed. They do a variety of things for me. And we're going to go give a talk at a high school like this, and we're driving a distance to Palm Springs, and Manuel's in the front seat. So we're 15 minutes on the road when suddenly he gets an incoming text, and he reads it to himself, and he kind of chuckles. And I said, well, what is it? Oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I'd just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazote as the day began, and Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in our 300 workers. It's a tough job. I said, well, what's he say? Oh, gosh, it's dumb. Hang on a second. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, I got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, we died laughing. I almost drove into oncoming traffic. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They are from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? How do we bridge any distance that may well exist? Even in service, you may experience this in your own service. A service, you have to make sure, is only the starting point. Service is not the end. Service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom. You want to get to the ballroom. That's the place of kinship. Even in service, there's a distance. Service provider, service recipient. You don't even want that distance. At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth is, we're all in need of healing. We're all a cry for help. It's one of the things that joins us together as members of the human race. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend. And he was an extraordinary man, of course, but one of the best listeners. If you were talking to Cesar Chavez, you were the only one who existed. Nobody else did. And I remember once a reporter had commented to him, he said, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar just shrugged and smiled and said, the feeling's mutual. Which is, of course, the goal of kinship, to enter into this exquisite mutuality where there is no daylight that separates us. That's God's dream come true. There was a homie everybody called Dreamer, and nobody found more job opportunities than this guy Dreamer. I knew him as a little mocosito growing up in the projects, and he got into a gang, a very smart kid with a dangerous sense of humor. But there was a period in his life, like in his early 20s, where he was kind of a yo-yo. He kept going in and out of being locked up, and I'd find him an opportunity, a job, either in the private sector or in one of our 7 businesses, and he'd always kind of gravitate back to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of, and then he'd always wander back to me. So this one time he had finished a 4-month stretch, a probation violation in county jail, and there he is sitting in front of me in my desk, and he says what homies often say, this time it'll be different. Like, all right. So with him sitting there, I pick up the phone. I call a friend of mine who runs a vending machine company in Alhambra, California, and this guy Gary had hired homies in the past. I'm thinking maybe he'll do it again. And so sure enough, Gary says, tell him he can start tomorrow. And Dreamer began work at the vending machine company the next day. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is again, sitting in front of me. And I go, híjole, Madre Santa. Here we go again. But this time, he has his very first paycheck from the vending machine company. He waves it proudly, and he says, damn, G, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I say, well, God, who? And he looked at me strangely, and he said, well, God, of course. Oh, sure, no, that's right. That would be God, yeah. He said, you thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh, God's number one, yeah. He said, you are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now, he said, you know. Well, I just remember that we just dissolved in laughter. We fell out of our chairs, and I have no idea who's the service provider, who's the service recipient. It's mutual. As was mentioned in that kind introduction, Homeboy Industries was born a long time ago, in 1988, during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission. And Dolores Mission was nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village, and at the time they comprised the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other when I drove up, making it, according to the LAPD, the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. So if Los Angeles was the gang capital of the world, my parish was the gang capital of Los Angeles. We had shootings morning, noon, and night. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 193rd about 3 months ago. Not all from that community, but I know a lot of gang members. I get asked to do this. So the first thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So they were wreaking havoc in the projects. They were writing on the walls, selling drugs. They were violent. So I walked out to every single one of them, and I said, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, they all said, yeah. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, you know, so that was kind of my challenge. So I went to the convent, which was located on the 3rd floor of our parochial school, first 2 floors, the elementary school. The whole 3rd floor was the convent. So I gathered the nuns together in the living room, and I said, hey, you know, would you guys mind, you know, moving out? And we could turn the convent into like a school for gang members. And they said, sure. And so we did. The gang members came in large number to the church. And that upset the apple cart a little bit, because aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? You know, good people in, bad people out. So that was a good gospel challenge. And then the gang members said, if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women in the parish, we marched all around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers. And that wasn't so forthcoming. So we created all these kind of ventures, landscaping, maintenance, graffiti removal. We had a crew of rival enemy gang members build a child care center. But the demand was too great. So I went to a movie producer who happened to have $500 million. I said, you know, break me off with some of that and buy this old abandoned bakery across the street from the church, 80-year-old building. And we'll get enemy rival gang members to wear hairnets and bake bread together, and we'll call it Homeboy Bakery. And he said, sure. So we did. And a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market in downtown LA. Once we had plural, we named ourselves Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this venture. Not everything worked, I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And now nobody ever intends to do something like this, but we've backed our way into becoming the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program in the world. 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors trying to redirect their lives and reimagine hope. Just about anything you think that might be helpful, we try to do it. We have 250 in our 18-month training program, all gang members from rival gangs. We have all these curricular things from anger management to parenting to, we still have a school, 115 students, all gang members, kids on probation. We have free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos than we do. You saw some of that in the film. We have 3 laser machines, a designated clinic, 1 paid physician assistant, but we have 37 volunteer doctors who remove tattoos, 46,000 laser treatments a year. And it all started because of a guy named Frank who I'd never met before. He wandered right out of Corcoran State Prison. And 2 days out of prison, he's sitting there in front of my desk, and tattooed on his forehead like a billboard, filling the whole space, and pardon my French here, it says, "Fuck the world," fills the whole space. And he says, "You know, I am having a hard time finding a job." I said, "Well, you know, Frank, maybe, you know, we could put our heads together on this one, you know," and I'm thinking, where the hell do I send him, you know, to McDonald's? You know, do you want fries with that? No, I don't want fries. Mothers clutching their kids, racing out of the store. So I hired him. He worked in the bakery. He bagged bread. That's all he did, was put bread in bags. And I found a doctor at White Memorial Hospital who gave me 1 hour a month to chip away on Frank's forehead and a few others. Within no time at all, I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted this service, and so we couldn't really stay with this arrangement. Parentheses. Frank is a security guard at a movie studio in Hollywood, and there is no trace left of the dumbest thing he had ever done in his life, proving once and for all that all of us are a whole lot more than the worst things we've ever done. Then we have we have mental health. Everybody's in therapy. We have 5 paid therapists, but we have 43 volunteer psychologists. Everybody's in therapy, trying to do the work, as we call it. We have a lot of case managers. Excuse me. We have our training programs. We have our solar panel installation training program. And we have all our businesses. Homeboy Diner, the only place you can get food at City Hall. If any of you fly to Los Angeles and American Airlines is your carrier, we have a restaurant there at the LAX terminal. We have, I think, 36 farmers markets where we sell our wares. We still have Homeboy Bakery. We have Homeboy Homegirl merchandise where we sell our logo stuff online and in our retail store. Homeboy Silkscreen, that's been around for 20 years. What am I missing? And Homegirl Cafe, as you saw it there, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And they cater. Some years ago, Oscar-winning actress Diane Keaton showed up for lunch. She came with a guy who's there once a week. She of Godfather movies, big movie star. So she comes in, and her waitress is Glenda. And Glenda's a big girl, been to prison, felon, gang member, tattooed, parolee. She does not know who Diane Keaton is, and so she's taking her order. And Diane Keaton says, "Well, what do you recommend?" And Glenda rattles off the 3 platillos that she particularly likes. And Diane Keaton says, "Oh, I'll have that second one. That one actually sounds good." And then for some reason at that moment, something dawns on Glenda. She looks at Diane Keaton, she goes, "Wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere. You know, like maybe we've met." And Diane Keaton decides to sort of deflect it humbly. "Oh gosh, I don't know, I suppose I have one of those faces, you know, that people think they've seen before." And then Glenda goes, "No, now I know. We were locked up together." That just took my breath away when I heard it. I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly, kinship so quickly. Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress. Exactly what God had in mind. How in the world do we know what is on God's mind? Well, we need look no further than Jesus speaking to the gathered as he says to them, that you may be one. I suppose he could have been more self-referential. He could have said more about himself, but it's really about us, that you may be one. There's an idea that's taken root in the world. It's at the root of all that's wrong with it. And the idea is this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives, how do we stand against that idea and obliterate once and for all the illusion that we don't belong to each other? All of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, calls enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love return people to themselves. You don't hold the bar up and ask anybody to measure up. You just show up and hold the mirror up and you tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth and my truth is a gang member's truth, and it all happens to be the same truth. And here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks, especially those on the margins, as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it, no 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But every once in a while, you have to reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. Marcus Borg, the great scripture scholar, says that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout scripture is shame and disgrace, and I think that's quite right. Lately, I've been taking a leisurely stroll through the Acts of the Apostles, and you could read it, I suppose, as a quaint snapshot of life in the earliest Christian community, or you can read it as the measure of health in any community at all, including here at Fordham Prep. Things will leap off the page if you read it that way. Things like, see how they love one another. That's a great way to measure. There's nobody needy in this community. Excellent metric. But my favorite one, I had never heard before, and it goes like this. And awe came upon everyone. It would seem that the measure of our health as a community may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So a number of years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And I thought I was just going to give a keynote or a talk. And then I read the material more carefully, and it said, I'm going to speak from 9 to 3, kind of an in-service on gangs. And I'm the only speaker. So I brought 2 homies with me. I brought Andre, who worked, African-American, who worked in our retail store, and Jose, who was, at the time, worked in our substance abuse division. He was a man, Latino, in his late 20s, been to prison, but who had worked his way up at Homeboy through the maintenance janitorial crew and finally into the substance abuse department, a man thoroughly in his own recovery, solid, and now helping younger homies deal with their addiction. But not only was he in prison, but he had a long stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So when I get Andre and Jose with me in Richmond, and I said, get up and tell your story. Take your time, because we got the whole damn day to fill here. So Jose got up. I never heard their stories before. Jose began in sort of an offhanded way. He said, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers, they gasp. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish, he said to them, and then 600 social workers laughed. We needed a laugh. Then he said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California. She walks up to an orphanage, she knocks on the door, and she tells the guy who answers, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me. My grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt, because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt, you could still see the blood. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, clearly overwhelmed with the emotion of it, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. And now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. And so Fordham Prep is not the place you've come to. It will always be the place you go from. And you go from here to stand at the margins because it is the only way to get the margins to disappear. And people will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And you go from this place to make those voices heard. I'm going to just tell one last story, and then we're going to open it up to questions, and I hope answers. I'll anticipate a question. People always ask me about enemies working together, and decidedly it's kind of a dicey thing at the beginning. A homie will come to me and say, I'm ready, ready, ready. I go, okay, I have an opening in the bakery, but you have to work with X, Y, and Z, and I rattle off the names of rivals, enemies. And the homies always do the same thing. You know, they think for a long-ass time, and then they say, okay, I'll work with them, but I'm not going to talk to them, which used to bother me in the old days until you discover that it's impossible for human beings to demonize people they know. Human beings can't sustain that. So I had a guy that I was going to put at our Homeboy silkscreen factory, which is our biggest, longest running business continuously. Thousands of gang members have worked at our silkscreen factory, which is a little bit off campus. We have 2,500 customers. We do high quality work, reasonably priced. We UPS to the Bronx. So this kid's name was Youngster. That was his gang name, Youngster. Sometimes I'll call kids by their gang name if it's benign, Lefty, Shorty, Youngster. I won't call anybody Sniper or Psycho or something like that, Had a big, huge vato come to see me just the other day, right out of prison. I said, by the way, what do your homies call you? Fluffy. Ooh, I'm trembling in my boots there, Fluff. So I have Youngster, and Youngster is ready to work. So I bring him to Homeboy Silkscreen, and I introduce him to all his coworkers, about 30 of them on the floor of the factory. And I watch Youngster as he shakes hands with every single one, looks them in the eye. There were a lot of rivals, a lot of enemies. Finally, he gets to the last guy, a guy everybody calls Puppet. And when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they mumble something. They stare at their shoes. They don't shake hands. Well, I know that they're enemies, but because I know what gangs they're from. But he just shook hands with other enemies. I discover later that this is a hatred that's really quite personal, quite deep, beyond which neither of them think they can get past. So I sense that much at the moment. And I say, look, if you guys can't hang working together, let me know. I got a bunch of people who want this job. We'll cut to 6 months later. Puppet leaves his house, walks to a corner store some distance from his home. He buys something. On his way home, he decides, for some reason, to take a shortcut. So he dodges into an alley. And because he's taken this detour suddenly, unexpectedly, he's surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1. And they beat him badly, and he falls to the ground. And while he's lying there, they will not stop kicking his head until he's lifeless. Somebody finds his body and takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead. But it's the policy there at the hospital to keep you connected to machines for 48 hours so you can get 2 days straight of a flat read with no brain activity, allowing the doctors to make it official and sign the death certificate. I was giving a talk at St. Louis University. I flew home immediately. I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life, but nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen many times its size. It was, honest to God, the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen. You could barely train your eyes on him. So at the end of the 48-hour period, I gave him a blessing as a priest. I anointed his forehead with oil. We disconnected. And a week later, I buried him. But in the first 24 hours, as Puppet was lying beaten in the hospital, I'm alone in my office. It's 8:30 at night, and the phone rings, and it's Youngster, Puppet's co-worker from the silk screen. And he says, "Hey, that's messed up about what happened to Puppet." And I said, "Yeah, it is." And then with a certain kind of eagerness even, he says, "Is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood?" And we both fall silent under the weight of it, until finally he breaks the silence, choking back his tears. And he says with great deliberation, "He was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together." Now, can I say that always happens at Homeboy Industries? Well, of course it does. Any exceptions? No, not one. And it shouldn't surprise us that God's own dream come true for us, that we be one, just happens to be our own deepest longing for ourselves. For it turns out it's mutual. Fordham Prep is not the place you've come to. It will always be the place you go from. And you go from here with a vision to stand at the margins and hope that the circle of compassion will widen and no one will be left out. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. Thank you all very much.